This drink has its own invisible border, and it's made entirely of sugar. Drive through the American South and order a glass of tea. Chances are nobody will ask whether you want sugar. It arrives already sweet, already cold, because that's simply how tea is served. Cross into much of the North, however, and the opposite happens. Tea is usually unsweetened, and if you want sugar, you'll have to add it yourself. This invisible divide is often called the sweet tea line, stretching roughly along the old borders of the Confederacy. Even today, it's one of America's strongest food traditions. But here's the surprising part. Sweet tea didn't actually begin in the South. Tea itself came from China and reached America through European trade. During the colonial era, it was an expensive luxury enjoyed mostly by wealthy families. In fact, long before sweet tea became a Southern symbol, people in places like Charleston were already trying to grow tea plants locally, hoping America could one day compete with China. Still, the sweet iced tea we know today couldn't exist for one simple reason. There wasn't enough ice. Before refrigeration, ice was incredibly valuable. During the early 1800s, a Boston businessman named Frederick Tudor believed he could make a fortune by cutting ice from frozen New England lakes and shipping it to warmer places. People laughed at him. Who would buy frozen water? But Tudor proved everyone wrong. Packed in sawdust for insulation, enormous blocks of ice survived long sea voyages to cities like Charleston, Savannah, and New Orleans. For the first time, wealthy Southern families could enjoy truly cold drinks during scorching summers. The second ingredient was already waiting: sugar. By the 19th century, sugar had become common in wealthy Southern homes, though its availability came through one of history's darkest systems. Sugar plantations across the Caribbean and the American South depended heavily on enslaved labor. Tea, sugar, and ice all carried stories of wealth, trade, and exploitation. Now all three ingredients finally existed together. The only thing missing was a written recipe. That recipe appeared in 1879. Marion Cable Tyree published a cookbook called Housekeeping in Old Virginia, collecting recipes from hundreds of Southern women. Hidden inside was what historians believe is America's earliest printed recipe for sweetened iced tea. The instructions sound surprisingly familiar today. Brew strong tea. Strain it. Pour it over ice and sugar. That's essentially modern sweet tea. A few years later, another cookbook replaced green tea with black tea, creating the version most Americans recognize today. Many people believe iced tea was invented at the 1904 World's Fair, when a tea vendor supposedly poured his hot tea over ice after customers refused to drink it. It's a fun story. Unfortunately, it's almost certainly false. Cookbooks had already been printing iced tea recipes for more than 20 years before the World's Fair. The legend survived simply because it's easier to remember than the truth. Sweet tea's biggest rise came during Prohibition. When alcohol became illegal in 1920, Americans searched for new drinks to serve at gatherings. Throughout the South, sweet tea quickly became the perfect replacement. By the late 1920s, it wasn't just popular, it had become expected. A proper Southern hostess was supposed to have a pitcher waiting in the refrigerator before guests even arrived. Offering sweet tea became a symbol of hospitality, but this tradition also carried an uncomfortable reality. In many white Southern households, especially wealthier ones, the women receiving praise for their hospitality often weren't the ones making the tea. For generations, black domestic workers prepared the meals, brewed the tea, served guests, and cleaned afterward. Their names rarely appeared in cookbooks or family stories, even though they helped preserve many Southern food traditions. The contradiction became even more obvious during the Civil Rights Movement. Restaurants proudly advertised Southern hospitality while refusing service to black customers. Lunch counter sit-ins throughout the 1960s challenged exactly who was allowed to enjoy that famous welcome. Sweet tea remained on the tables. Equality did not. Eventually, governments themselves began celebrating the drink. In 1995, South Carolina officially declared sweet tea its official hospitality beverage. A few years later, a Georgia lawmaker jokingly introduced a bill suggesting every restaurant serving tea should also offer sweet tea. The proposal wasn't meant to become law. But the joke only worked because everyone understood how seriously Southerners take their tea. Businesses noticed too. Restaurants like Chick-fil-A and Bojangles built part of their identity around fresh sweet tea. Even McDonald's eventually introduced sweet tea nationwide, an unusual move for a company famous for keeping nearly identical menus everywhere. Regional brands like Luzian and Milo's also developed loyal followings. For many families, choosing between tea brands became almost as personal as choosing a favorite barbecue sauce. Today, that invisible sweet tea line still exists. Walk into restaurants across much of the South, ask for tea, and you'll probably receive sweet tea automatically. In many northern states, you'll get unsweetened tea instead. It's one of the few food traditions in America that still changes depending on where you are. Of course, sweet tea also has a downside. A single large glass can contain nearly as much added sugar as a soft drink. Over time, health experts began linking excessive sugar consumption to obesity and diabetes, conditions that already affect many southern communities. As a result, some families have quietly adapted. Instead of fully sweet tea, they mix equal parts sweet and unsweetened tea, creating what's commonly called half and half. The tradition survives, even if the recipe changes slightly. Meanwhile, sweet tea has expanded far beyond front porches. Craft cocktail bars now mix it with bourbon. Upscale cafes serve gourmet versions flavored with herbs, peaches, or lavender. What was once considered an everyday working-class drink has become fashionable in expensive restaurants. Yet its history remains far more complicated than those elegant presentations suggest. Behind every glass lies a story connecting Chinese tea, global trade, sugar plantations, northern ice merchants, Civil War-era cookbooks, black domestic labor, prohibition, segregation, and southern identity. Very few drinks carry so much history. So what happens when you cross the sweet tea line? You're not simply changing beverages. You're stepping into a region where one simple drink became a symbol of hospitality, family, tradition, and identity. Sweet tea survived the end of slavery. It survived prohibition. It survived refrigeration replacing the ice trade that first made it possible. It survived changing tastes and growing health concerns. Even today, a pitcher waiting in the refrigerator still says something about home in much of the American South. In the end, sweet tea isn't famous because it's just tea mixed with sugar. It's famous because generations of people transformed an imported luxury into a regional tradition that still defines an entire culture. And that's why, even now, crossing that invisible line can change what arrives in your glass. Ye voiceover script has ma ye error raha ha ye plz. As ko holkar do limit ho thai ha agar ye error age tu plz. Remove the error.